the program correctly there. That will be in session 6 within the Gnowbe program. And with that, I'm going to introduce our lovely Nicola and Fernando, and they're going to take over here.
Well, thank you, Megan. Guys, it's so good to see you. I see quite a few familiar faces. So welcome to the conference. I hope that you've been really enjoying the experience so far. It's probably a little different than what you're used to when you jump on an online conference. We very much encourage participation, interaction, because we learn best by doing and thinking through some things in wrestling. So without further ado, I really want to introduce Fernando to you, and you'll probably pronounce him better than I will. But I had a fantastic discussion with him last week, and we're really excited to have him speak to us on the subject of AI, friend versus foe. It's such a topical conversation right now, wouldn't you say, Fernando?
Absolutely. Yeah, you know, the questions I get, these talks have come from all the questions I've received throughout my lecture series. So as of 6 months ago, I was lecturing on creativity, specifically on how we scale creativity, rethink what creators are, creative people throughout the history of time. And I can give you that postulate in a bit if that's interesting. But essentially, teaching creativity as a skill to world leaders, to making hit records. But the most pressing thing is, you know, is the potential relationship and its perspective in relation to our value proposition as human beings with AI, alongside the features of synthetic intelligence, and then the evolution of synthetic intelligence merging with organic intelligence.
Definitely. I'm going to just share my screen so everybody can jump along. As Megan said, I believe we are in, can everybody see my screen? So we are sitting in session 6. And before he gives too much away about himself, go ahead and you can see that there's a quick poll in here. I'm curious to know. There's a lot of things that Fernando has actually done, as you can see here. Fantastic. So many things to learn from you as a creative. What would you say would be the other world famous act that Fernando has produced for? I'm not going to guess because I know for a second, so I'm going to give you about 10 seconds to put your answer in. Or there's some, I could give it away, but I won't. I'm going to give you 5 more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Fernando, do you want to do the reveal?
Sure. Yeah, it's you two. I had a chance to work with the group years ago, and it's great music together, and yeah, so it's one of I have a whole arsenal of artists, a list that I've procured over time.
That's amazing. It's so good. I have many more questions on that, but for another day. So jumping into AI, I thought it'd be really interesting to hear from everybody first, because AI is such a big topic right now. And for some people, it's a huge win. And for other people, it's actually a real threat to their existence as a content creator, as an educator, as a creative in general. So I'm curious to know from our participants, I wouldn't say audience because you guys are, you're an engaged learner. So feel free to jump in here, put your response down. It's interesting already, actually, from the responses here, isn't it, that we've got quite a number of people who are on the fence. And to be honest, I mean, I'll probably be swayed after your conversation with us, but I'm probably on the fence here as well. Does this surprise you at all, Fernando?
No, because it's still not at all. Because like unless you're on the cutting edge of product rollout, right? So how you know, let me just quickly, do you want me to kind of kick this off and kind of give you some perspective as far as like why this is the number you received, Nicola?
Please go for it. I think
yeah, so essentially unless you're on the kind of, I guess the like the ground room floor equivalent of plugin development for ChatGPT, Baird, or any LM derivative or diffusion model derivative. So there's two worlds, right? Right now. There's other artificial intelligence, but there's predominantly right now it's language learning models and diffusion models. Language learning models are derivative of the English language, which then translates into code and etc. The algorithmic code to give you output to your inputs. Diffusion is based on existing models that leverage more, focus more on the output of the experiential, such as visual, audio, etc. So that's just a kind of a crude assessment of the two worlds. That's the tech that's being used overall right now, majority. So unless you're in developing the plugins that are rolling out using these two models, you would be on the fence too, right? And so when you see the rollout of this, you start to understand both the strengths of the human and the weaknesses of the human, the output cognitively. So the strength is that we can understand how to use it right now, but the challenge is that we still don't know how exactly it does what it does. We have an idea mathematically, but we're still in a sense reverse engineering the models so that we can better understand essentially consciousness.
That's really, that's really, really interesting. So I think let's piggyback off what people are kind of commenting on. I would be really interested because sometimes it's just nice to know what you have in the room, and then we can kind of speak to some of the common concerns. So guys, I'd love for you to take a moment, and actually I'm going to type some of the notes that you give me. I would love for you guys to turn off your mics and actually feel free to volunteer stuff, our team as well, but also you can feel free to jump on your phone and put down your answer as well. So I would like to know, what concerns, if any, do you have currently about AI as it currently relates to your role as a creator? So feel free to jump in with some answers, and I'll type them out. What would you guys say?
Can I jump in?
Please.
One of my concerns would be identity theft and security issues, privacy issues. That's something that I'm not entirely sure is how well that can be navigated.
Interesting. Thank you. That's good. We'll keep popcorning it. We'll get a couple more, and then we'll see what other people have put on the group wall.
Well, that happens. I can answer that. That's more efficient.
Oh, go for it.
Sure. So essentially what we're looking at is there's no consensus of even terminology to use for this, right? So Will Lamb says facial math, a few others say essence, but what does that mean, right? Essentially what that means is, I can borrow the term fingerprints. So what people have recognized the value set of what makes us human as we're defining that, well, we can identify, well, some of the things that people recognize as being human is the face, our sound of our voice. So these I call specifically fingerprints. So how do you develop an intellectual property law equivalent to establishing what the ground floor rule is for ownership of who you are by way of facial fingerprint symmetry that's uniquely yours, voice signature fingerprint that's uniquely yours. But how about this one? Character fingerprint that's uniquely yours. So how do you do that, right? Because when we look at brands, we look at brand personality. When we look at celebrities, we look at celebrity personalities, right? So how do we quantify that? That's what you're heading up against, an IP law. That's a challenge. We don't have the vocabulary for it. So what's going to happen is essentially it's this period of renaissance or chaos, whichever seat you prefer to your worldview to sit by or on, and then you have adoption, right, and then distribution, right. So we're at the essence, the chaos, Cordic Renaissance space of this question, right. And it's a very good question. It's a very, I mean, at the forefront question. Yeah.
So good. Any other ones, guys, that come to mind? We can just list off a couple. I'm sure there'll be more in the group board. Wonderful. Well, let's jump to. Oh, go for it.
Mine's on the board, but just the idea of if we're all using it for creativity, does that not limit the creativity? Because in the creativity, what makes us, different and stand out? And if we're all using one tool to gain creativity, then isn't it all coming from the same place? And that does eliminate creativity.
Yeah, I got it. Let me walk you through this question specifically from my understanding of it. So I've been teaching creativity as a skill to world leaders, arguably for the past 10 years. I say arguably because there's different tiers of leadership roles, and so luckily I've managed to work my way from the top down. And so essentially, creativity is basically the brain's ability to create. And so throughout history, we use tools to create, right? And so these tools have evolved. right? Essentially, from the up until the Renaissance period, and then through the post-industrial revolutions, all four of them. So the tools are evolving for creativity, and yes, the human output is essentially the top tier for me, philosophically, is creativity. It's the brain's ability to truly synthesize all its experiences, and then by using this model called combinatorial and cumulative innovation, which means building from the past, cumulative, and combining those past ideas into something new, combinatorial, you end up with an output. It's called originality, right? So yes, that's essentially think of them as tools that are evolving. That's one world of perspective. Now, the problem with this one world of perspective is that it's derivative. So it's from regenerative data points, regenerating existing knowledge from the history of humanity that's been onloaded to the research grounds that's called the internet and its databases. So basically, innovation is still there, so long as it's human curation that's curating, overseeing this process will yield to new results. Without it, you will see, I think at this very much point, this will change, but at this point right now, you'll see regenerative ideas that are still combinatorial and still have a certain uniqueness in output, but still needs human curation to validate its output.
Yeah, so I see it. And we're going to tackle it a little bit later, kind of how we can future-proof ourselves as creators kind of towards the end of this discussion. But I think just addressing these concerns, or a few that are highlighted to you here, Fernando, is there anything that kind of jumps out that you would want to speak to?
Oh, I didn't answer that question effectively. What's the need for, will eliminate the need for creators? Well, I think it's the question I like to ask myself, will it eliminate the need for humans, right? And so ultimately, because they're one and one, but let's revalue how we see, just follow me on this tangent, revalue how we see humans for a second. And rethink this, right? So before the Industrial Revolution, we valued ourselves on wisdom, and it's and then spiritual derivatives of wisdom as well, right? And so we have formidable knowledge as Aristotelian thinkers, right? As logicians, and that's we valued ourselves that way, right? Then we had after the Renaissance period, we have an introduction of the beginnings over time of an industrial revolution, right? So this industrial revolution gave us a new value proposition. Well, now knowledge, skill-based knowledge was very valuable, right? So when you have skill-based knowledge, then we have, okay, I value myself by how successful I am as a businessman early 20th century, right? How valuable I am as a toolsman, as craftsman, as all these industrial revolution derivatives. So that's how we evolved our value proposition. Now we look forward to where we are today, prior to the democratization, egalitarian access point to AI. We have ending the industrial revolution, to this area of industrial revolution, with access to knowledge as our value proposition, right? So as we went from acquisition of knowledge, application of knowledge, to now identifying ourselves as value through how we use this knowledge in society, right? In every endeavor of our life, that's how we value pretty much in the Western world, how we value ourselves. Now we're shifting to a new perspective that we have to adopt, essentially, to navigate and rethink our value proposition. So there's a term I like, I think it came out of MIT, which is called the Homo sapient, right? So it's a borrowed, derivative of Homo sapiens, etc. But Homo sapient is the human feeling, essence-based entity, and that's essentially what makes us really human, is to be able to feel our way through reality, right?
So you're talking about emotions, instinct. Exactly.
So the more the nuanced derivative of the prior to the Renaissance period, right? The sensory-based essence of ourselves. So that's still very difficult to quantify or articulate, but we can say that that's one thing per se that synthetic intelligence still can't do, and it's going to be very difficult to do, only because we technically do not understand how we synthesize all these emotions, how we interpret the world through consciousness. We can't yet still to this day agree upon whether consciousness is emergent from the self or it's non-behavioral deterministic. It's everywhere, right? We can't even decide that. We can't even agree on in academic spaces where the most intelligent people arguably in the world exist, still can't agree on this very point. So, but there's a caveat, and I feel more confident than ever that we can double down on what makes us human, and therefore better makes us as a society more effective to use and to synthesize these tools in a way that brings humanity value.
Yeah, I think it's the thing, like we get industrial revolution was very knowledge based, and you get ahead of the game by knowing more. But now information is everywhere. So being able to use intuition and instinct and emotional appeal as social, that's not going to go out of existence. And actually, it causes our learners to become more effective because they're having to analyze and evaluate. You don't lose those parts of yourself when you're creating content. You mentioned some really interesting things when we were chatting last time, when we were demystifying kind of AI. I'll just pull up my screen here. And you were just mentioning that it's already in everyday life. We use lower forms of it already. There are a couple of ones that you put up here: the internet, the calculator, the use of chatbots. Did you want to embellish on this at all?
Yeah, this is the question that's derivative of like, is it going to replace us? Right, the existential question, and although this is the argument I find like very reasonable in the sense that, well, we've had tools before, like calculator and obviously the internet, but we have tools throughout the history of existence that helped us evolve to our greater selves, and for the sake of growth. But this one is uniquely different in that it's the first tool that rivals, if not outperforms us cognitively in many ways. That's the difference. And so what this is an existential challenge to ourselves as humans, in the sense that it can outperform us for the first time in certain spaces. And it's not that it's like really, 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 really awesome right now. It's the propensity to be awesome really soon.
Yeah. Because right now, I mean, you can type in stuff into ChatGPT and it's really, really great to get you started. But as you start using it more and more, it becomes really basic language, not fresh, original stuff. So it's definitely in its early form.
But the actual timeline is really short in which it will excel. That's the argument. It's closer than we think. And I don't mean to sound any way apocalyptic in any
into the world,
but I need to distill and articulate as best as I can where we're at, right, as far as the challenges.
I asked you the question last week, and I'd love for you to share it with these guys because it's very topical. Because I'm always thinking when I'm creating content or I'm teaching or whatever, and I'm leveraging content like this, I want my learners to be able to decipher whether it's content that's been created by a human or whether it's been content created by AI. Can you tell the difference?
So this is essentially 10 years ago. I had access, 2011 specifically, a little bit more than 10 years ago, access to the first round of deepfake voice cloning, and it wasn't any different than it is today, I should say. And so I saw this coming, so I started framing out what creativity really is, how to teach it, how to frame it out as a skill. And so that's what I've been doing with the world leadership community and academic community. Thereby, I think now more than ever, it's essential to understand your very nuanced essence that the Industrial Revolution has dulled, right? Our sense to feel, our sense to sense other people, get to know the true nature of another person by doing what we used to do before, right? Is leveraging our senses to better delineate between what's synthetic and what's organic. This is a skill, right? Now, I'm not saying that with the skill that you'll be 100% accuracy rate. I'm trying to figure out whether an ad coming to you is synthetic or organic, or a person on the ad is synthetic or organic, right? It's to better train what you sense your instincts telling you it's organic and synthetic without the need for a machine telling you that. So we hedge ourselves by being more human.
Interesting.
Equally, we hedge ourselves by having the best tools to synthesize whether something is organic or synthetic. You see,
Mhm.
it's
But,
you know the
yeah.
power law of the universe is essentially polarities of negative and positive, right? And so that's also in our cultures, right? Yin and yang. I can go on further into that, but I'll stop myself from there. But essentially, and these polarities have been also a misnomer. It's spectrum of negative and positive, right? It's a balance between understanding what is harmful, what's good. It's a spectrum of this. So that's why I say always hedge yourself. And I think the value for creativity as a skill, instinct, intuition as a skill, is going to be one of the most valued postulates that we can see when it comes to wisdom and what the human value is.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, to a lesser extent, we joke about it that you would never use Wikipedia as an effective research site because it's full of flaws and a whole bunch of people jumbling their stuff on there. Already we're having to teach our learners, our users, to be able to decipher what's right, what's wrong, what's fake, what's not. So this is definitely an elevated version of that, isn't it?
So interesting. Wikipedia is actually one of the most highly curated, most successful crowdsourcing, but it still has its deficiencies. You're right.
Yeah, it's interesting. Could you speak to, I mean, I put a space in here actually just for me to take notes, and everybody else, I encourage you to do the same. How can we leverage it effectively? So you said that 10 years ago, you're already kind of preempting that this thing was coming.
Yeah.
I mean, if you wouldn't mind sharing some advice that you are sharing with creators, a few tips and best practices about how we can, we've got L&D professionals, we've got people who are training, onboarding, teaching, lecturing, all kinds of different fields, but how can we leverage it effectively in a way that it doesn't replace us, but it actually enables us to do better at our jobs?
So when I get this type of powerful question, Nicola, I look to figure out where this sits in my problem-solving capabilities. For me, to get to that point, I say, well, is this a complicated issue or a complexity issue? And then, so that's my first one. And so complicated problems are problems that the questions to ask to solve. Complexity are problems that you have no idea what the questions are yet. So at the beginnings of this question, you do have a complicated scenario. And then I'll get to the complexity issue of this. So the second way I try to solve problems is, how would I give my children the tools to leverage the answer?
Wow. Tell me more about that.
Well, arguably, the people you care about the most in the world would be the ones you've given life to. So if you're going to have a prolific answer, you want to have it in a way that empower those ones you love the most in the world. So therefore, your answer, this secures the answers the best you can do. So for me, to answer your first tier, this is a complicated question. Leveraging AI effectively. Well, what's your goal? So if your goal is to be the best criminal in the world in any space, and to do evil and to do harm to humanity, then you want to become really effective at prompting and diffusing your way through hacks. If you want to be the most prolific at being great and good for the world, then you want to become the most prolific at generating the effective prompt that will get you to the space, as well as generating the imagery and the content that will support your argument in a very prolific way. And so now, if my children is going, my child, my son, my daughter is going to make a choice, then I would first start with, do you want to do good in the world? Do you want to do evil in the world? And I hope the answer is good, obviously.
Yeah, hopefully. I wonder where you're going when you started out with the criminal example.
Well, if I go further, then this is not the place, I think, to share the specifics of it. But let's say you can do equally, really effectively well, do good or do evil. So what is your goal? My goal is to teach my child to be extraordinarily good for the world. So in order to do that,
Can you give an example, like a practical case study scenario where maybe you've leveraged it effectively in your area of expertise?
So in order to do that effectively, right? So to teach my child, to answer your question also, is to teach him the arts, teach him humanity. Because the press prompter right now is a philosopher meets behavioral cognitive expert.
Wow.
Because you must treat it like, when you prompt effectively, if you look at the way some of these great philosophers of our generation are, if you look at how would Alan Watts prompt ChatGPT, right? How would Hume prompt ChatGPT? Now, knowing that you have to ask it to be an expert of something to begin with, or to be the most prolific at the specific niche of the existential arguments of philosophy, right? Then you can use it to its fullest degree at this very point in time. Over time, that'd get easier. You would have to just be prompt less effectively. But I think over time, you'll see that the more you strengthen yourselves with the worldview of the creative generations throughout history of time, and then think like one, so it's not generative of what exists already online, you'll have a little bit of a hand up, leg up, right? That's what I would teach. That's what I'm teaching, actually, my children and my next generation community. So that's the humanities are the kind of the one of the most ultimate superpowers right now. We can shift our academic disciplines across the board from kindergarten to Ivy League. Remember, we took them out. We took them out of our education system, public. It's very difficult to get.
Sorry?
Yeah, the humanities. It's very difficult.
It's the first thing to go. It's always the arts, isn't it?
So I would swap out the coding schools and computer science schools for humanities. So that's aggressive. That's aggressive, but essentially that's my point. Just to make my point, that's where we're headed.
It's a great example. So taking out something like history or something that's very knowledge based.
No, taking out coding. You don't need to code anymore.
Correct.
Yeah, coding is English, right? It's any language. It understands every language. So I think essentially the best thing you can do with your time is you don't need to learn Python anymore. C++. It's done. Done. Right. In other words, there's plugins that do it way better than some of the graduates out of these universities.
But then he's looking at like leadership development and communication skills,
character,
all of these soft skill kind of focuses that we're talking about, in addition to the arts, social and learning behavior, all of those kinds of things. You're saying,
that's right. So you have an egalitarian access to data points, right? So it used to be that as in business, you have this is interesting. It's worth sharing, at least from my opinion. So we've always valued venture funds and its investments per se on its data plus leadership. But yet we're going to have access to data points at scale, right? How to qualify a company, how to qualify a fund, how to qualify an investment. So we're going to need new tools to separate what's truly worth investing into. And these new tools that I'm seeing, because I have access to specific communities that are working on this, I can see a focus on the character, because that's still very difficult to quantify. There's a couple pieces of great literature on this, but character is something that is innately human. It can be mirrored through pattern identifying, but character is what we're going to look for as far as who to invest in and what to invest in. And we're seeing these schools of thought play out in what departments of universities are developing, right? So new departments based on this very topic.
Yeah.
And funds are being qualified on this very topic, and new investments are being qualified in this very new perspective.
Yeah, it's a really great example. Maybe this is the same question from a slightly different lens, and then I really would love to hand the rest of the time over to our participants, because it's such a hot topic right now. It's all over the place. So I'm sure they've got brilliant questions too. But slightly worded in a different way, I'm curious, what do you think AI is going to look like? I know you can't predict, but if you could, in 5 years' time, and I guess the flip of that is how can we safe or future-proof ourselves?
Depends where you're at and where you're looking. But for us, if I can just sum it up for the Western world, I think it's going to
There
be
you go. Yep.
it's going to be you've seen it now. If you walk down Rodeo Boulevard or any popular street on any boulevard of any major metropolitan city, you see the individual on their phone just staring down and just walking, right? Like, and you see kind of these automatons, not to degrade any way, shape, or form, but these automatons are based on a reward mechanism built by platforms that's very prolific, right? And so, in a sense, what this means as they're walking through and bumping into a wall is that we've created a world built on incentive structures that are misaligned with our true output as a human. So the reward mechanisms you're starting to see is when you have access to pretty much any piece of information and now synthesis of that information that's really meaningful with AI, you're going to be left with, you offload this cognitive ability you used to use, your human calculator, right? You offloaded it now. You're going to offload
That's
it.
a good way of putting it, a human calculator.
Human calculator. You're offloading this, ability
Good.
to synthesize information and generate information.
Yeah.
And so what's left? Well, what drives the brain, arguably, right? And when when you're all fed and you've slept, what drives the brain? It's meaning, story. So when you're looking down, these people looking down and, so they're looking for meaning, right? They are generating their meaning through the stories they're receiving online, right? Through their platforms. So the human brain has 12 hierarchical cortical structures, including the prefrontal cortex, et cetera, that are always delineating between what's not a story and what's a story, right? And equally generating a story based on the environment, what they receive, if they're non-proactive about the stories that are incoming. Right? So their environment determines their behavior through the stories they receive about the environment. For example, I get my wallet stolen, therefore this place in town is very bad, and specifically this race is really bad. That's a very awful example of how to do this wrong. So the environment is generating the story if you're not proactive, right? But so all that power, all that meaning searching and story acquiring is now here, right? And that process of generating that story that you used to be very vigilant about the human being and finding a story through meaning and purpose and spiritual awakening, etc. Well, that's here now, right?
Yeah.
So what's left? What's left is all the computational things that we used to work really hard on. It's going to be challenged in a sense. You don't have to try this hard anymore to acquire meaning, theoretically, right? That's the interesting part for me.
Very interesting. But I like what you're saying, though. You can't replace you. So when you're speaking to story and the context of content, the reason content actually sticks is not because of the knowledge itself. People can read over that. But if I've got a story that I can connect with, relate with on an emotional level, I'm going to remember that content way better than if it was just something that was knowledge-based.
Now, so to your point, and let me just double down. What happens when you acquire meaning and purpose? Well,
It drives you to
no
do
one
something.
really doesn't acquire it until you take action upon what they acquire.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. So we see throughout the history of religion, throughout the history of culture and social, environmental, evolutionary biology, that it's until you take action that you've crystallized that information.
Exactly. Practical application. And that
so that's,
I mean, it kind of highlights the need for instructional designers and people who are content creators, because you actually still got to craft a learning journey that's going to get somebody from point A when they enter into reading your content, absorbing it, consuming it, to I've transitioned, I've changed, I've transformed, I've got new perspective output. It's not just knowledge, it's learning by doing, right?
So that's where we're at. And that's my final point I'd like to make here at the very least, is that if I were to focus as a leader, if I were to focus as an entrepreneur, as an innovator, I will double down, and that's what I'm doing now more than ever, on the human experience. If you look at the entertainment industry as a proxy, and you go to a parking lot of any Taylor Swift concert, you see 20,000 people who couldn't get into the concert singing all her songs while the concert's being performed. What does that tell you? If this is the case proxy litmus, you can see that the appetite for human connection is extraordinarily abundant. Thereby, this is going to multiply 10x at the very least within the next 5 years. Therefore, you can set your platform to educate online as the beginning proxy of our connection, but you must double down with the human experience. Therefore, really intimate human experiences beyond conferences.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the more that you can make that create an in-person feel as much as you can, that human component, you can't go with it. I love it.
Yeah.
It's so well put. I couldn't have done a better job to wrap it up myself.
Thank you.
I really would love to give 5 minutes just to hand over to, I'm pretty sure, some eager questions coming from our participants if they're up for it. So feel free to turn off your mics, guys, and the time is yours. These are fantastic learnings. Thank you, Fernando.
Sure thing. Thank you.
If you're not comfortable speaking, you can also feel free to drop it into the chat, and Nicola or one of I will bring it up.
Oh, forgive my intensity. I'm very passionate about this, so I won't.
No, it's fantastic. Fernando and I realized we could talk about this subject all day. It's absolutely fantastic. I think it's exciting when I hear it. It doesn't make me scared about, oh, we're gonna lose our jobs if we're educators or creators or any of this field. If anything, it just highlights the incredible best practices that many of us are already applying.
Yeah, with the caveat, right? Like, look, the reality is there's certain industries are going to be wiped out immediately.
Yeah.
Right. So look, we can't. You can bury your head in the sand or pick up an axe and a shovel, pickaxe and a shovel. Right? Start digging. Like the reality is, there's certain things that are just the knowledge-based economy is going to take a huge hit, and then you're going to see equally. Look at where professors are going to sit. Just the oracles of the planet for the Western world, right? They're equally as challenged, right? Because their whole industry is based on knowledge and the synthesis of that knowledge, and the personality they use to deliver that knowledge to their students.
But here's the thing, and I don't want to give away from the session I'm about to run and one of the breakout sessions, but there's a real difference between covering material and here's the knowledge that I can go blah, 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 but you could also access it yourself, versus my role really as a content creator is to cause you to do something in some way, shape or form. So in this sense, my job is not to cover the material, it's to cause you to learn, to eagerly go after you, chase after you, knowing that you've got different learner types, Captain Moore just said it in our session before, we all learn at different speeds, different paces, we all connect with different emotional experiences. So me understanding and anticipating your needs better is going to craft a learning experience that actually, it doesn't matter, AI will help to leverage that, but it cannot replace what we do.
Absolutely. I agree with that 100%. It's up to you. The information is public. The reality is certain industries are going to evolve, and knowledge-based economy is going to have to rethink its title. But equally, it's I think as we gear towards the human human side, we're going to see ourselves strengthened and more efficiently use what synthetic intelligence is more effective at doing, which is gathering data, synthesizing those data points, right? Synthesizing, right? And then creating a starting point today on that data and how to take action on it. So it's the best research tool out there right now.
So good. Amazing. Do you have a success story to share?
Well, we've been using AI for a very long time. So 2003 was maybe Autotune is the first kind of algorithmic tool musicians have been using. We generate our content with AI. I now, like, instead of having 4 red cameras on one of our interviews in my studios, we just now use like 3 Sony cameras or 4 Sony cameras with no mics, internal mics, because we use AI and derivatives AI plugins. And it just sounds incredible. It sounds like you have a really high-end microphone. And then the video editing is done through AI. So we've been using AI since the first tools came out publicly and privately.
This is nothing to do with content creation, but kind of is. I'm curious, can a person tell the difference between a AI manufactured piece of music versus something that was organically kind of recorded?
That's a great question. I didn't answer this question effectively earlier. And so essentially, yes and no. Why I highly recommend to learn creativity, its nuances, and be more creative, pick up an instrument, learn how to draw, paint, read more Hume, Schopenhauer. It is because the more you train the sensitivity to feel, the more you start to feel what it feels real to you or not. Because that's all we have right now. And it sounds archaic, but it's true, right? Yep. When you see an image of an artist that's self-generated video, right? And it has a perfect symmetry. It's the way the eye twitches or the face just shifts in a weird way that, like what I'm doing now, it's just not quite human.
Yes.
And you only can pick up on the subtleties at this very moment by how sensitive you are. That's what I say. The creatives have been, their value proposition as commodity makers for platforms and throughout the history of time have been completely wrong. The value proposition of the creative is that the next generation leaders, people just don't know it yet. That's why I work with world leaders specifically, is to showcase that there's a lot we can learn from the creative class, and you're undervaluing in the creative class because they're going to be your oracles for the future.
Oh, so true. It's so true. They could teach us so much. It's really interesting, actually, when I don't know about you, when I hear a song and I hear the imperfections, sometimes that will make me remember the song in a really lasting way, and I'll emotionally connect with it because it's not perfect. I'm like, oh, that could be me too. I can achieve that thing.
Phenomenal, Nicola. It's a great metaphor, right? So there's, I had in my studios, I have just easily one of the world's best, if not the best, a monitoring system in which we listen to our music. We're like they're fine instruments, and they're made out of wood, and they're massive. They're like 16 feet high and maybe 6 foot wide towers of speakers, right? And then we have it's monumental. The reason I say that is because it's a company. So I had the founder here yesterday. Tuning, it means making it sound great. And we were talking about it and his philosophy on design. And well, I don't use any plastic components. It's all wood. It's all living and breathing. So wood expands and compresses. That's why they sound the most pleasing to the ear. It's these imperfections of wood expanding and compressing like a guitar that makes it so pleasing to the ear, because it's different every time you listen to it. It's not the same condition of that wood, right? The reason why the ocean is so pleasing to the human ear is because it's never the same ocean wave that's coming through.
Oh, wow.
It's the asymmetries of randomness that make it human and humanly pleasing. That's what I mean by us being unique.
Which tells me you're not passionate about this at all. I can tell, by the way. Which tells me that when I'm creating content, I need to bring myself fully to that content. I think a lot of us as content creators are like, content's here, here's my thing that I've created, and I'm devoid from that. But actually, if you're vulnerable, because many of us don't like, actually content creators, some of us don't actually like having our faces on camera, but that emotional connection to the person who is speaking, producing content, actually, if I can connect with emotional rapport in some way, shape, or form, or oh, you're vulnerable, or oh, you're a little bit insecure, I'm connected to that and I actually want to buy into what you've got to say, right? So that would be the flip side example of that.
That's the instinct is to base trust on the openly flawed human, right?
Isn't that interesting?
So it kind of all coincides with, again, back to this point, what makes us human. What I see a question, would Bach be would he use AI if it was available during his time? Well, and would he still be successful and externally recognized as one of the most prolific human savants that have existed? Well,
and this will be the last question. Sorry, just to wrap it up.
He's a savant. So essentially he would be, I think what would have changed is access would be, he would have produced more content.
Because it would have freed him up from the basic stuff to go deeper.
The grunt work,
Interesting. So good, great answer. We could probably hear from you all day. We really appreciate you taking the time to share your learnings with us. And thank you so much for joining. I'll hand it over to Megan because she can redirect you as to where everybody heads next. But thank you so very, very much for your time, Fernando. Appreciate you.